Hello, dear lovely children. Let's do another interesting lesson from your reader book, Honeydew. Today we shall do lesson 7, A Visit to Cambridge. This lesson is about a candid conversation between two great personalities who are similar to each other in some way. The story revolves around the protagonist or the main character, Stephen Hawking, and the author of this lesson, Firdaus Kanga, and a place called Cambridge. In short, let me give you a brief idea about them. Cambridge, paradise of scholars. Cambridge is a city in England. It is actually a university city. It is one of the world's leading places of learning. It was probably established in 1209 and is second oldest university in the world. Another important and notable feature of this university is that it has a disability resource center which assists differently abled students to facilitate their comfort during the course. Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking was born in 1942, studied physics in Oxford, and later went to Cambridge for his postgraduate research in cosmology. Now, Oxford and Cambridge both are world famous universities. During his post-graduation, he was diagnosed with a rare form of neuron disease, and doctors predicted that he would live only for next 2 years. But he lived for long 76 years. No disability of his could stop him. He went on with his research and bookworks. Because of his disease, he was confined to a wheelchair and had to take help of speech synthesizer to speak. Stephen Hawking was a renowned theoretical physicist and cosmologist. He is known for his contribution in the field of cosmology, gravitation, quantum theory related to black hole, thermodynamics, and information theory. Now, Firdaus Kanga. Firdaus Kanga, novelist and performer. Firdaus Kanga was born in a middle-class Bombay family in 1960. His semi-autobiographical novel, Trying to Grow, which was written in 1994, was turned into the award-winning film Sixth Happiness, for which he not only wrote the screenplay but also played the lead role. He was born with brittle bone disease, a condition which means he cannot walk, and that even if he sneezes, he is in danger of breaking a rib bone. I hope you understand. Even if he sneezes, he is in danger of breaking one of his rib bone. His bones were so weak. This confined him to the wheelchair. He has dual citizenship, British and Indian. Currently, he lives in London and works from there. And now, you're well acquainted with Cambridge, who was Stephen Hawking, and about Firdaus Kanga. Now, let's start reading the introduction of the chapter. This story is an extract from Heaven on Wheels by Firdaus Kanga. Before you read, this is the story of a meeting between two extraordinary people, both of them disabled, or differently abled, as we now say. Stephen Hawking is one of the greatest scientists of our time. He suffers from a form of paralysis that confines him to a wheelchair and allows him to speak only by punching buttons on a computer, which speaks for him in a machine-like voice. Now, confines means that restricts him. Okay, he was a scientist of our age, of our period, of our time. He died in 2018. His body was so much under the disease of paralysis that he could not move his body parts. He cannot even speak with his tongue. Even the muscles of his tongue were gone weak. If he wants to speak, he used to take help of a computer. He used to tap. The only part of his body that had movement was his finger. And with those fingers, he used to tap on the screen and his voice would be converted through the voice synthesizer and we can hear what he wants to speak. Okay, so Firdaus Kanga is a writer and journalist who lives and works in Mumbai, but currently he lives in London. Kanga was born with brittle bones, that is, bones that were so weak that tends to break. That tended to break easily when he was a child. Like Hawking, Kanga moves around in a wheelchair. The true great men exchange thoughts on what it means to live life in a wheelchair and how the so-called normal people react to the disabled. Now let's read further. Cambridge was my metaphor. Metaphor means a representative, a thing that is regarded as representative or symbolic of something. For Firdaus, Cambridge means England and England means Cambridge. So Cambridge was a representative of England. And it was strange that when I left, it had become altogether something else because I had met Stephen Hawking there. So the author begins by telling the readers that at some point in life, England only meant Cambridge for him and nothing more. He further remarked that after his meeting with Stephen Hawking, the meaning and relevance of England in his life changed completely. Let's read further. It was on a walking tour. Walking tour means sightseeing tour made on foot. Now here, though Firdaus Kanga was on wheelchair, he was not on foot. They were not taking a vehicle. That's why it is called as walking tour and his guide was walking along with him. It was on a walking tour through Cambridge that the guide mentioned Stephen Hawking, poor man, who is quite disabled now. Though he is a worthy successor to Isaac Newton, whose chair he has at the university. So, he's telling, the author mentions that he happened to be on a walking tour through Cambridge when his guide spoke about Stephen Hawking. Before that, he had completely forgotten that Stephen Hawking lived there. The guide called him a poor man because he was differently abled. He even told the author that Stephen Hawking now is such a prestigious scientist that now he holds the position, the status, the chair of the famous, the great scientist Isaac Newton. And I started because I had quite forgotten that this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist. Now, what is this astrophysicist? Astrophysicist is a scholar of astrophysics. Now, what is astrophysics? Branch of physics that deals with stars, planets, etc. So he had forgotten that this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist, the author of A Brief History of Time, one of the biggest bestseller ever, lived there. Okay, so he was very excited. Now, after hearing about Stephen Hawking, Firdaus Kanga could not stop himself from meeting Stephen Hawking. So he had a desire to meet Stephen Hawking. When the walking tour was done, he rushed to a telephone booth because that eagerness has arisen in him that he wants to meet Stephen Hawking, almost stealing the code so it could reach me outside. As he was on wheelchair, he couldn't enter the telephone booth. So he had to pull the receiver towards himself outside the telephone booth. and he pulled it with so much of strength that it was almost tearing the cord. Then he phoned Stephen Hawking's house. There was his assistant on the line, and I told him I had come in the wheelchair from India. So the assistant on the other hand, Stephen Hawking's house, the assistant received the phone. And Firdaus said that I have come all the way from India on the wheelchair. When he mentioned this, probably the assistant must have thought that he has propelled himself all the way. Propelled means he has pushed himself on the wheelchair just to meet Stephen Hawking. He said he has come all the way from India on wheelchair to write about my travels in Britain. I had to see Professor Hawking. Even 10 minutes would do. He just requested that even if I get 10 minutes to meet Stephen Hawking, that would be more than enough for me. Okay, by considering that he has come all the way from India on wheelchair, he has propelled himself on the wheelchair, assistant gave him half an hour. Half an hour, he said, from 3:30 to 4. So the time that was allotted to him was half hour from 3:30 to 4. Now here you can see the picture of Stephen Hawking on his wheelchair, and this is a screen. This is a screen on through which he would express himself. One thing to be noted, in his young age, he was in much better condition, but as he was growing old, his condition also deteriorated. The nerves of his body became weaker and weaker, so he was not even able to move his head or any part of his body except few fingers of his hand. Okay. And suddenly I felt weak all over. And the feeling that he's going to meet Stephen Hawking, such a great personality, made him weak all over. Growing up disabled, you get fed up with people asking you to be brave. So what he's telling that growing from the childhood he was disabled. So growing up weak, people would have sympathy on you. And when you're not able to do something, they think that the disabled people have some bank account, okay, in which all their courage is stored, and they don't want to withdraw. They don't want to draw the courage out of the bank. This is what the people think. This is what he mentions. The only thing that makes you stronger is seeing somebody like you achieving something huge. He's telling that it inspires to see somebody who is like you or who is in worse condition than you, and he is doing so much in his life that inspires. That makes you strong by seeing that person, and you want to achieve. You also want to achieve something. Then you know how much is possible and you reach out further than you ever thought you could. So by seeing that person, that inspires you and that helps you to grow more. Okay, I haven't been brave, said his disembodied computer voice the next afternoon. So the next afternoon, when he was able to when he went to meet Stephen Hawking at 3:30, he said, the next afternoon when he went to see him, Stephen Hawking told him that he hadn't been brave. He was just telling his truth. And what is disembodied? Disembodied is separated from the body. Why it is said separated from the body? Because it is not he who is actually speaking. It is a box that is outside his body is speaking for him. That's why it is called disembodied, separated from the body. And he is confessing that I had no choice. I have had no choice. I had to live like this. Though whether I am happy or not, I have to accept the fact that I have no choice. He spoke in his disembodied computer voice that he had no other option. Surely, I wanted to say, living creatively with the reality of his disintegrated body was a choice. Okay, so what is disintegrated? That is, break up into parts as a result of impact or decay. Disintegrated, that is, his body is being disintegrated, becoming invalid or in vegetative position. So, the author wanted to reply that living so creatively, even with this disability, was a brave choice, but he refrained from doing so as his guilt took over every time he pushed Stephen Hawking to respond by talking to him. Okay, but I kept quiet because I felt guilty every time I spoke to him, forcing him to respond. Stephen Hawking was in such a pathetic condition that he was not even able to speak, not able to move. And here, what author is doing, he's forcing him to speak. He's forcing him to speak something. So he was feeling little guilty. So he did not respond. He kept quiet. Then he was tapping at the little switch in his hand, trying to find the words on his computer with the only bit of movement left to him. Okay, so Stephen Hawking was trying to find words on the computer, and the only movement that was left was in his fingers, his long, pale fingers. Every so often his eyes would shut in frustrated exhaustion, and sitting opposite to him, I could feel his anguish. Now, what is his anguish? It is severe mental or physical pain. The mind buoyant with thoughts that came out in frozen phrases and sentences stiff as corpusces. Buoyant means intensely active and vibrant. Though his body was disintegrated, his body could not make any movement, but his brain was intensively active and vibrant. He had 100 kinds of thoughts and ideas, and he has done so much of research in different fields of astrophysics. But the voice, whatever thoughts he had in his mind, but everything came out very frozen, like the voice that does not has any emotion. That's why it is said frozen phrases and sentences stiff as corpusces. What is corpusces? Dead bodies. Okay, there was no emotion, no life in his sentences or words, whatever was spoken through the synthesizer. A lot of people seem to think that disabled people are chronically unhappy. What is chronically? To a very great extent, or they are habitually unhappy. I said, I know that's not true. Myself, are you often laughing inside? So what he said, I know that is not true, but people think that disabled people are always unhappy. With this, let's wind up. We'll continue this chapter in the next video.